Yeah, so this is the beauty. This is where I get really passionate because this is where BPM really comes to the fore, and without BPM, you will never be successful.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process. Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with process practitioners across the board, across many different types of organizations, at many different levels. I have had the privilege of speaking with people from the academic realm, consultants, internal employees that are really driving the adoption of business process management within their organization. And if you've been following us for some time, you know that they're all very fascinating conversations with very personal experiences about their journey in this whole world of business process management. And if you've been enjoying the series so far, it would help us out a lot if you give us a rating or a review or share the podcast on any of the platforms. We want to continue to spread business process management throughout the world. And that's one way that you're going to help us do that. But in today's conversation, very exciting one that I've been looking forward to for a while. We have just cracked 150 episodes, so we're kicking off the next 150 with two people that I admire greatly. We've got Dan O'Neill, who is financial services executive specializing in operations, automation, and technology leadership. And we also have Roger Tregear, who is a BPM consultant, educator, coach, and author of the book Reimagining Management. So I'm sure that many of the audience is familiar with these two names, these two men. And we have certainly had them on the podcast series so far. Very excited to have them both join us in this special episode where they're both in the same call. So hopefully there isn't too many sort of conflicting advice, but we'll manage that if that comes up. Roger, Dan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel. Great to be here again.
So what we might do to kick off with, and I should have prefaced this, but leading up to this episode, for those that are listening, we've put the call out to the Process Pioneers community, saying that, we've got Roger and Dan both coming on the show. Send in your questions. We know that a lot of people have a lot of questions for these two. So I wanted to hear from you guys in terms of what questions you wanted to ask them. And we had many, many questions, and we certainly won't be able to answer all of them, but we've tried to sort of triage them and organize them into a meaningful way. So we'll work our way through these questions and hopefully get you the answers that you're seeking or looking for. Obviously, this is merely a podcast episode, so if there's anything that we don't get around to, feel free to connect with the guys afterwards. I'm sure they'll be able to answer anything else. But kicking off question number one, Roger, I'll get you to kick us off, but is business process management a good name for what we do? And the background to this question is this person did some informal surveys several years ago, found that regular people in an organization, especially in mission-driven enterprises like healthcare, higher education, social services, justice, one, they hated anything that had the term business in it. Two, they hated the implications of the P word, process. And three, they hated anything that had the word management in it, which can be quite difficult if the people are hating those three words. So, Roger, can you help us out there?
Yeah, it works for me, and it's what everyone uses. You say, is it a good name for what we do? Well, of course, lots of people are doing different things under that same banner, which is terribly confusing, of course. But it is about business, and it is about process, and it is about management. Business in the most generic sense, I guess. And I think this is the wrong question. I think if you're having a problem not being able to say the P word in your organisation, then I would be wanting to understand that better. Someone's been frightened by a process as a young child, or, we tried that last year and it didn't work. And almost certainly you're not doing what I would prefer to call anyway process-based management, but has the same problems, I guess. So I think, if we can't say the P word, why is that? Well, you've got a huge amount of education to do, because I don't think it solves the problem by coming up with a different name for the same thing. You still can't get it to work, I think, anyway.
That's great. And Dan, what's your experience been like that?
Yeah, look, it is an interesting question. You're quite right, Roger. In the talk I gave, was over 2 years ago, I said process is everything. Every value you create, every experience you provide, and everything you deliver is through a process, right? So it is every core part of the business. But I do think you have to be cognizant of who the audience is. So, and I always refer back to, it's like BCP. Everybody hates to talk about BCP, but everyone knows that they have to do it. And if you start mentioning BCP, people run away, even though they know it's a key regulatory requirement. It's a key part of your business. So I would go back to, who's your audience? What is it that you want to do to entice them or engage them, and use the language that they understand? So, to another BPM expert, you can talk about BPM because you're not going to faint and people won't run away because you know what you're talking about. If you're talking to an executive and you're trying to explain what BPM is all about, then, don't talk about BPM. Talk about, do you understand how your business is running? Wouldn't it be good to understand what your customer experiences look like, what your staff experiences look like, what your risk and controls look like? Do you understand where they currently are? And if you're designing the future, then how do you ensure that you understand the current to move towards the future? What's the methodology and the approach that you can take? So it all depends on the language, all depends on who your audience is. Listen to what they're saying, listen to the terms they use. And if you see them flinch when you use certain words, then be a bit more creative and use other terms to get them on board. It's part of the sales job that we do, and everyone is a salesperson in this type of environment to get the outcome that you want. So typical consultant answer will be, it depends. When you're talking to an expert, BPM is the perfect way to explain what we do, because we all know what we're talking about. But when you're talking to executives or project people or product owners, then use a different language that they will understand, where they get the benefit from.
And I guess that's particularly important to know when there's changeover in terms of the senior leadership, or maybe people that you've been working with to bring along this journey for some time. They step out of that role, they change position, department, even organisation. You have a new senior leader brought in. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can keep tracking along, doing the same thing or taking the same approach, I should say, that you've taken. If there's a new person come in, you don't know initially their background or what they've just come from, and how, I guess, the whole topic of process was handled or managed at their previous place of employment. So, we've got to treat it as we do have to understand who is this person, what's their background, their perspective, the context, and what language do we need to be talking or using to bring them on the journey.
I think the other thing is, typically when you talk about BPM, what people refer to and what people jump to when you speak to some specialists, that they just go straight to a process map, and that's what people then go, what am I looking at? Why am I looking at a process map? It's way too detailed. I don't understand it. I don't know what these little boxes mean, these arrows flowing around the place. So you got to keep away from that. And that's typically why people have this fear. As I said, it's a bit like BCP. If to understand BCP, you have to understand the technicalities and the detail behind it to really get into it. And people don't want to, because it's not value adding. It's managing a risk, it's managing a crisis. So with BPM, the tendency is process maps, just don't go anywhere near them. That's what I would say. If you see people flinching with BPM, then the last thing you should ever do is show them a process map. So talk about something else. Talk about the value add, or the things, the insights that they don't know, the actionable insights that they can work with. That's what people want. And we can do BPM in the background. The executives want to talk about the value add, the actions they can take away.
I think that's true. Of course, you've got to match it to the audience. I agree with that for sure. If you're going to be successful with that audience, though, when you start talking about value delivery and risk management, et cetera, you have to get to a point, even with that audience, where you can talk about process, because ultimately that's what it's going to be about.
Yeah.
And if at some point you're going to have a mixed audience, then you've got a problem. Value delivery, but on this side, that means process. I mean, it's a complex, mixed, messy kind of language that we have seemed to have gone out of our way to make as complicated as possible because, lots of people have different understandings about all of these things. But I think, avoid process if you have to, but explain what it is. I mean, get to a point where, it's about, the M in BPM is for management, not modelling. So that's the message you've got to get across at every level, really.
It is. I agree. You've got to entice them in. And then once they understand the benefits of the actions they can take from it, and then they go, well, how do you do that? Then you can explain exactly what it's all about.
Process.
Yeah.
And as well as, I guess, the language that we use and maybe some of our process practitioners maybe flashing up process maps earlier than they should, what do business process professionals and process teams, what other things do we do that undermine our efforts?
Yeah, well, one of the parts is that we're not always incredibly clear about so what. And tell me something, the typical thing, remember when I first started doing this and getting into it was, tell me something I don't know already. What's the actionable insights I can take? How is that going to help me in my business? What's the one thing I can do walking away from here? So I think we need to be really explicit and clear about what that looks like. Now, sometimes as a business, you have to take a risk. I remember, again, certainly in previous roles where we had to find the current environment, understand the environment as it currently is. And there was a tendency to go, no, look, I found all this stuff. We put all this modeling or mapping together and we can understand how things flow. And look, here it is. And then everyone, and I thought it'd be a brilliant piece of work. And then executives will look and they go, oh, yeah, really interesting. So what? And I go, well, now you know how it works. And they go, yeah, okay, great. Now I really do know how the business works and it all flows. Thank you. So what? So I think that's the key part for me is, once you've gone through the current environment, you understand what's going on, you do need to help identify, take the extra leap from a business point of view, going, okay, actually, here's stuff that you really need to be aware of so you can make some decisions or you can make a direction or we can have a debate about what that means. So there's some actionable insights, some next steps we can take or a direction decision that you need to do. And that to me is probably the most critical component. And that's a really, really hard one as well. Right. But if you can find that, but also find the sweet spot of saying, tell me something I don't really already know, then you're onto a winner.
Right. And Roger, answering that question, the so what, I guess in your experience, what does drive an organization to adopt a business process management approach? Like what do the senior leaders care about? What does BPM mean for them?
Yeah, I think it's really not so much why they adopt it, but why would they keep it going? Lots of organizations adopt it because it didn't take much of a decision on the part of many, if any, executives to get it going. But why would they pursue it, and why would it become an agenda item at an exco, an executive committee kind of meeting? That's the question. And I think it's pretty simple, pretty complicated, but pretty simple. It's about delivering organisational performance benefits, and demonstrably so. And that's got to be something at the heart of organisational performance. I say this kind of every day to someone, that no organisation's got a business problem called we don't have enough process models. You might have consequences of not having that, but it's not the business problem. If you, at the end of the year, if your claim to fame as a process group is that we've modelled 500 processes, then you should be sacked immediately if that's the only benefit you can nominate. Because what the heck, that didn't do anything. But if you can, if we've reduced a risk, we've avoided a risk, we've increased customer satisfaction, we've reduced costs, increased revenue, all the classic things. If you can actually say, we did this and it's directly as a result of process work, then okay, you'll be invited to take a seat at the board table, not just present to it. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. So success breeds success.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dan.
No, I'd say it's so true. I mean, you're exactly right. There's a huge tendency, certainly in the past, of people, as you said, just going out and doing mapping, and even to some regulatory requirements that come through from the financial services, which are dictating that you must map your critical processes. And so it becomes a project, and people are going to go off and they're going to spend a lot of money doing that. And so, very quickly and sharply going, yeah, that's really important for the high impact process, what we're doing, but let's make sure we're getting the right insights, right? What are the decisions we're taking? And, the model I always keep using is it forces you to do some conscious thinking so you can make some conscious decisioning at the right executive level and understanding what your current environment is and designing what the future state is. And therefore, every change you're making, if you're moving towards a target state of customer experience, staff experience, keys, risk and controls, and efficiencies, then you're doing the right thing. And if you're not making those changes, moving towards that target state, then it's a waste, right? They're the projects you've got to stop. If you're not measuring them, and there are some great tools out there, even to the best tool we were sort of talking about earlier of actually walking and doing the Gemba walk and walking the process and doing some sticky notes or capturing on a piece of paper, they are brilliant measurements to month on month tell you whether you're moving forwards or not. And that's where the success factor is, not that you've got, as Roger said, 1,000 processes in your system, and that's not a KPI that anyone wants.
Mm. And you touch on I think the real issue in there, Dan. It's that too many organisations are not actually measuring process performance. Mm. We're doing some things. We run some process improvement projects, and we make some things better, but we really can't say what it was before and what it is now and what it's going to be next week, even more important, and next month. We're not. I think process mastery is about being able to, with reasonable confidence, say how this process is going to perform next week and next month, not last week.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point. Sorry, Roger, but to your point, where we think we're measuring it in a business, and too many times you see this, is very siloed. So it's in a team or it's in a division. And I always love your diagram, which I use probably daily as well. With as an organisation, we organise ourselves this way. I'm thankful I'm using 4 fingers this time. But as a customer, you cut across, right? It's the customer experience cuts across multiple divisions. There's not one division that manages the customer experience from need to outcome. It cuts across many, and so we've been very successful, certainly where I am now, to move towards, and in previous banks, you put in some proper process governance to say, okay, what's the true end-to-end customer experience from need to outcome? How many touches do they do? What's the rework looking like? What's the staff experience like? How many screens do they touch? How many things do they have to rework? How long does it take each time? Where's the wastage? What are the risks with the controls? Are the risk and controls in the right place? And if where they are do they need to be there? And what's the efficiency like? What's the cost behind it? And they're measurable things that you can monitor month on month. And then using wonderful tools like process mining, actually see what the customer experience is, see where it loops around, where the bottlenecks are, rather than just relying on a piece of paper. Actually visualize it, bring it to life, then use that with your executives, who then see it. And it's a bit like, the flashing light in the old computers. The only reason it was there to get the executive interested that something was going on. So the same thing, but I love that with process mining, brings it the whole to life to say, we need to do something here, let's go for it. So that measurement or management of the end-to-end process is the most critical part of any BPM program that would be out there.
So when talking about governance or process ownership, it ties into a question that had been submitted around what level of the organisation should process owners be, and what would be their typical roles and responsibilities. Dan, I'll ask you.
Okay, so look, it is a great question. I've tried and tested a few of these, and where I continue to land up is the process governance are the decision makers across the end-to-end process. So I call them the general managers of the process. And I'll have many debates with people about this. When people have tried to put it in and they go, let's put a racing model against it then. So who's responsible, accountable, go, no. If I see one racing model, I'll throw it up and throw it out the window, right? Because it's a bit like when you have an outsourcer provider and a company, and you're not agreeing on the service, and suddenly you get the lawyers involved because they want to talk about terms and conditions, and you go, well, we've lost the point, right? We've lost the purpose. So a process governance to me is there's someone who's accountable at the end of the day, whether it's a product head, for the end-to-end experience, because they are the key decision maker. But then you've got the key components that cut across the process. So specifically in a financial services environment, you've got someone from risk, you've got someone from technology, someone from operations, you've got someone from product, you've got someone from distribution channels that are there. And they then look at the end-to-end experience. So what does it really mean from a customer point of view? What is that experience looking like? Is it taking too long, too slow in the key moments that matter? And if it's taking too long or too slow, then what do we do together with our SMEs, with our people that will free up to resolve it together? It's not one person's issue, because whatever happens down the process is more than likely an impact of what happens up front of the process. If you want to resolve that, or if you want to make the process better and you want to solve it up front, then you want specialists down the back end to actually work with you to say, well, here are the things that causes problems. So how do we design it so we don't have the problems in the first place? There's too many times I've been involved in organizations there where we have manual workarounds, we have manual tasks, and people say, oh, automate it, put some robotics in place, and I sponsor the process automation, I sponsor robotics. And again, but all we're going to do is just automate the problem rather than resolve it and remove it in the first place. So huge believer in process governance with the key decision makers that are there, who are supported by good reporting. We use process mining where I am currently, which has been a huge success for us, and in other organizations where I've used it before to bring it to life. And then we are consciously making that governance group think about the key attributes, and then we are conscious in making them make the right decisions that improves the end-to-end experience, not by silo. And then they have one change management group, which is that part to say what changes do we want to prioritize and not prioritize. And we have one investment slate saying, here's the investment slate for this process to resolve, because we don't want multiple ones that might cut over each other. So in my experience, in the multiple banks I've worked in, and the current one I'm working currently, been the biggest success. Process governance, don't use racing models, be really clear, have it a general manager, because they are the key decision makers. And you just need to meet up, sometimes they meet up weekly, other times it might be monthly, depending on how big or small the change and the impact of the process is. So yeah, it's purely based on experience. That's not theory, that's reality. And the results you would have seen in the places I've worked with, where we have some high impact processes and experiences where you used to take 40 days to get a key decision, we're getting them down to 2 days. That's not huge technology investment. That's just a different way of working to make the right decisions, because we're constantly thinking about the right stuff. And that's how we do it.
That's great. And does that align with your experience, Roger?
Yeah, certainly I agree with all of that. And when you're working at the highest kind of end-to-end level, then your process owners and others involved at that level are going to be GMs and EGMs and people at that level. I think, though, you can also generalize it a bit, because sometimes the process that you want to manage is still cross-functional, but it's not at the top, it's down a bit. Maybe it's still even customer-facing, but it's a level or two down in a process hierarchy, and you still want to be able to manage that, because it's a high-impact process. And sometimes they seem like really small processes, like in a hospital, for example, on one project in a hospital, so I'm no expert, but there's a process called identify patient. And if you've had the experience of being in and around a hospital or any healthcare environment, the most common question is kind of, who are you? What's your name and what's your date of birth? And, all that kind of thing. And it's all about identify patient, which is perfectly easy to do when you've got an adult, conscious, competent patient. But sometimes patients are unconscious and sometimes they're 3 days old. So, life gets a bit more complicated. So it's a small process, but it's a common process, and it's fundamentally important you get it right. The consequences of getting it wrong can be indeed life-threatening, literally. So I think you can do it. And the way I think about the process owner then, you think about the process at any level, big to small, at any level, if the process owner was to call a meeting of the decision makers who can actually affect the execution of the various parts of that process, then they really should be peers, or not too far away. If you've got someone who's a clerk class 0 who's got to call a meeting of general managers, then it's not going to happen. And even if it happened, it's going to be a funny conversation. So if it's, who are the decision makers who can actually make a change to the execution of effectively of the sub-processes of the process in focus? And they're the people that you want the process owner to be able to have a good working relationship with, not handicapped by some leveling kind of issue. Now, that'll be different in different organisations, of course. I mean, say maybe in some organisations you can reach up and over, 2 divisions and 3 levels and it works, but that's not common, I think. So you've got to make sure you've got the right people. And sometimes you might even want to I think you might want to start at a lower level just to demonstrate how it works and have a bit of a practice. Lining up a bunch of general managers to form a new committee and to do new types of work is a bit of a challenge. If you happen to be the chief process officer, you happen to be Dan, the CPO, you can probably do it. But, most of us aren't. In fact, the rest of us aren't. So sometimes you've got to practice, off Broadway first.
That's great. That's good. And one thing, Roger, that we mentioned earlier or we've touched on is the importance for measuring our improvements. And it's a question that has come in, something that's been troubling this person is around the mindset for improvement. How can it be measured? What targets could be set or even if they should be set? And how do you reward progressive behaviours? Rewarding
people for doing their job is an entirely different question. And maybe you want to go down the reward path, but many organisations, I think most organisations who do process well, you don't find people going off for they won a prize week in Paris or something. I mean, they just do a good job and they enjoy doing it. But in terms of the targets, you certainly do need performance targets. I think that's clear. Some people argue against that, but if you're not measuring the performance of a process, then I don't think you can't be managing it, and you wouldn't have a clue whether you're improving it. So if you don't know what to measure, then go back to the group of people that execute it and the stakeholders, the people that receive the value from the process, and find out how to measure it. If you don't know how to measure a process, then you've got very little idea about the process. It doesn't matter how many detailed process models you've got. If you don't know how to measure it, then you don't understand the process. And that'll be the first place to start, And what is this process supposed to do? What does good look like? What does bad look like? What would exceptional look like? And you can have those conversations. It's not a technically challenging issue. You talk to the subject matter experts, the people who understand the process, When this process works really well, what's happening? And when it fails, what goes wrong? And what does that look like? And what are the impacts? And what does it feel like? You can pretty quickly come to good KPIs, and then you need to set targets and thin it all back so you've got the minimum number. But if you're not doing that, then I think, that's where you might need a bit more practice. And it's harder to do on the big fat processes. Smaller processes are easier, usually, I think, to come up with process KPIs. And by the way, they're process KPIs. You're not going to the list of, 300 KPIs that someone put together from the balanced scorecard strategy exercise and mapping those onto your processes. That's pointless exercise. You start with the process and you say, what is this process meant to do? This process is supposed to deliver value. What value and to whom? And how would we know? That's the process performance question, isn't it? If this process was doing what the key stakeholders wanted to do, what would it be doing and how would we know? Ask that question 100 times until you've got a good answer.
I think that question you asked just before, what does exceptional look like? I think it's a good question that maybe more of us need to be comfortable asking, because I think creating the future, as we're driving this adoption of BPM in our organisation, if our organisation isn't creating the future, one of our competitors will be, and we'll end up playing catch up to what they're doing. But I was listening to a podcast or something not too long ago. It was with the founder of Airbnb, and he was talking about the very early days of setting up Airbnb and how they had this sort of brainstorming exploration session of what does exceptional look like. And for them, it was, well, what does a 5-star accommodation experience look like? And so they'd throw out all of these ideas around, arriving to your accommodation and receiving all of these things. And then once that conversation had kind of wrapped up, it was, what does a 6-star experience look like? And they kept going until they got to, what does a 10-star experience look like, where, you land at the airport, you have an elephant and a marching band there to pick you up on the back of the elephant. You've got a parade going through the entire city, leading you to your accommodation. And then Elon Musk is standing there waiting to take you on a joyride up to the moon in his rocket. And that was obviously an extreme example, but I think unless we feel comfortable having these explorative conversations around, well, what aren't we, what it currently isn't being done, whether at our organisation or across the industry as a whole, how can we innovate in a way that hasn't been seen or done before? So I think that was quite an inspiring conversation, listening about the early days of and how beneficial it is asking the question, what does it exceptional look like, and creating that atmosphere that our people feel comfortable to be able to ask and answer that question.
But then you've got to test the reality of that, haven't you? Because even what you described as 6-star is not Airbnb.
Right.
It's totally different. So you might, use all those kinds of exercises to flush out ideas, and somewhere in there might be a gem, but most of it will be dross. But you have to always come back to the point of, okay, this is exceptional. Now, can we afford it? I mean, is there a business case for it? Exceptional has a price. But sometimes exceptional is easy. You might be, well, if we just stop doing this process, that would be exceptional. And everyone will be delighted.
Yes, yeah. Or even that example that Dan mentioned, where taking a process from 40 days down to 2 days. I mean, for someone that had been part of that process for a number of years, they probably would have been like, well, no, it's got to take 40 days. That's how it's always been done. And 2 days just wouldn't comprehend for them. But sorry, Dan, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say that it's great to have a target state. What people sometimes also fall into is all they focus on is the target state and actually not understand where they're coming from. Right. I always explain that as being, if all you're doing is focusing on the target without understanding your current and measuring your current, then it's called remediation. And then every business I know of has got significant spend on remediation because they're fixing the stuff that they've implemented because they never understood where the hell they were coming from. So I think it's such a critical component. It's great to have a wonderful, big, hairy goal of the future, but you've got to be so entrained and understanding about exactly what goes on now to make sure you cover those off and make the conscious decisions about, are you going to stop stuff? Are you not going to do certain services? Are you going to close down certain channels? Are you going to stop certain customers? Are you going to stop certain type of services to them? Because if you don't do that, then by the time you design your target, all the stuff that you didn't know about is suddenly messed around, and your customers will complain and you're going to have to go back and fix it. I think the other thing is, once you do understand the process, and sometimes it's not improving from a customer point of view. So you may have a process where your team are working really, really hard, and the moments that matter for a customer is to get something out the next day, and they're always achieving it. But the team never get time for lunch. They're stressed out. They're doing loads of overtime. They're making loads of mistakes. They're getting complaints. They're not focusing on the real difficult exceptions or managing the complex queues or items in the most efficient way. So sometimes just looking at a process is saying, well, how many touches is someone doing? How many screens are they looking at? How many times do we have to go back and do the rework? And so they are key measurements. And if you focus on those and say, well, if I reduce the rework, if I reduce the screens you're going to, if I reduce the touch points and show you and tell you that, not only are you getting more time back, which is a huge improvement for staff because time is our most important asset. So now you get more time to go for lunch, or now you don't have to work overtime all the time, or you get more time to deal with a real complex customer and the exceptions for a customer, so you can give them an even better service and get better NPS scores, wherever it may be. So when we are looking at measuring, it's not always just down to the customer. Sometimes it's good just to focus on what it means for your staff and what it means for the team and what it means for the company, and giving more time back to someone is probably one of the most underrated measures that we have that we don't talk about. And one of the things we are measuring in our organization, saying, how do we give back, is it 3 million hours or whatever it is across to our staff? How do we give you that time back? How do we make sure that you're using it for something valuable, and have the time to yourself, so that it's not just purely focused on always being at your desk? That's something else that you can do. So I think that's a really good measure to go for as well.
Yes, we are a stakeholder of our own processes, for sure. So we should be as gentle with us as our customers. And then, of course, you just need to hope that it's not the sort of organisation where when they discover that, you've saved an hour a week for 40 people, that means we can have one less person. So thank you very much. Well done. And next time you want to run some process improvement work, everybody's, busy that day, can't turn up. I mean, why would they?
Yeah.
But reinvesting that time, as you're suggesting, Dan, is that, surely we've got other problems we could be solving, particularly if these are people who've just been through an exercise where they did something really clever and important in terms of making stuff work better. Why would you want to get rid of them?
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's sort of back to that recognition sort of point that was there as well. So how do you recognize and reward people? There's great sprints that they do in Agile every 8 weeks. Have you moved things on by 10%, or how have you moved things on, and can you celebrate that and reward that? How do you make today better than yesterday? So even just small steps during the week as a team member, saying all these issues we had last week, we made this one change. Oh, look, we've got a bit more time back. We've actually been able to have our tea break together. We've actually been able to get home on time at 5 o'clock. There's all those little things that we can do. And I remember in one of the banks I was in where someone had said, we said, any continuous improvement ideas you have? And so I got one, but it's not really important. So what is it? So when we're doing these printing, we won't have these, let's not put these folder packs in there or blank pages in there, and because it will save some paper. It's not a great idea. And we add it all up, and suddenly you're talking about thousands of paper during the day, and then there's thousands and thousands of paper during the week, and you build over a year, and suddenly you've saved a hell of a lot of money, time, effort, filing, all the stuff that we were doing. I go, wow, that's a huge improvement, So it's there when you're having a high volume game like that, every small step, every small improvement is huge. And just take time to recognize, A, actively listen to them, and B, when you act on them, celebrate them, because it's that's where the gems come in.
Would you agree, Dan, that the small rewards, small personal rewards, are likely to have more impact than the occasional, big fat holiday reward for?
Oh, huge! Yeah, absolutely. Recognition is, there's nothing better than someone saying thank you, well done, thank you. And that's one of the delights of my role when you go around to different huddles or on Teams, as we do a lot now, or even the chats, or just dialing into someone's update, or putting something up in Yammer in the team and just calling someone out, or giving them a phone call. More importantly, just saying, I heard about this stuff you did. Well done. What a great result. Thank you so much. I mean, it's wonderful. Everyone loves a bit of recognition and a bit of thanks. And I think you're brilliant, Roger. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
And you, Dan. I couldn't do it without you.
So another topic that's come up quite a lot in the questions that were submitted is around governance, risk, and compliance. So risks and controls, and obviously there's lots of synergies between risks and our business processes. And I've just got a longer sort of question, which gives a bit more context to around where this question's coming from. But they say one thing I'm seeing become more and more critical is this whole area of risks and controls, and how do we ensure we are meeting all our regulation and compliance requirements around this? Given the controls piece is essentially about process, I'm finding people getting their heads around this is really hard, and then using that as part of a tech deployment even harder, especially in a highly regulated global landscape. How do you guys manage this so it is embedded in the way organizations think and not an afterthought throughout the process and requirements design phases? So how can process management improve the way we manage our risks. Dan, I'll get you to kick off this one.
Yeah, so this is the beauty. This is where I get really passionate, because this is where BPM really comes to the fore, and without BPM, you will never be successful. So, and having lived through this now multiple times in different organizations, which is heavily regulated, there's two key components behind it. One is you've got to have an enterprise-wide taxonomy and process library, right? There's only going to be one language that you have for your processes end to end. And that's when I first met Roger to help me understand that, and actually what does that mean, and how do you build something like that many years ago, Roger, if you remember, and you were trying to explain to me what a process taxonomy was, and I could barely pronounce it, let alone spell it. So that was a key component. And then the most important part of that is it's a bit like, Windows and Mac, and people go, I'm a Windows person, I'll never talk to a Mac, and they're two different technologies. And you talk to different process people and different teams and different organizations that have their own version of the taxonomy. You've just got to stamp it out and go, no, it can only be one language. We can only talk about one language here, one standard. And I think, again, I'll use Roger for this. If you're talking about what language you're using, what term you're using for more than 5 minutes, you really are wasting each other's time. So just get to a word, stick to it, and go with it. So that's the first component. The second component, if you're in a highly regulated environment, then you will typically find the risk, if they're a really good, experienced, mature risk team, they will be coming up with the risk and control taxonomy as well. And they need to have very clear standards about what there is across the enterprise. And so suddenly now you've got two taxonomies. You've got your process taxonomy, you've got your risk and controls taxonomy. If it's a really good, mature organization, he'll have its own assets and assets database as well. And so what I've been experienced in and have embedded is where you then have a single source of truth for your process and your process modeling, your process mapping. So really good tools and technologies for that. Typically, the risk and controls is in a different solution, because that's where you create your events, and that's where the obligations are captured. That's where you put all your actions in place to make sure that you're ensuring the controls are working effectively. Two, that every time there's a issue or event or an incident that is logged and there's actions against it. And then you get your two teams working with each other, which again can be done, because I've seen it in action. It's not easy, but it can be done. And once it's done, you then get the two systems talking to each other and overlaying the process taxonomy and mapping into the risk and controls environment, in the same way you're overlapping your risk and controls taxonomy into your process source of truth system. We used to call it the process warehouse, or not the knowledge warehouse, process knowledge warehouse. In the new environment we're in, we call it something else. And then suddenly you can then get a process view of risk, because you can, in your process single source of truth for process, you can get your process map out, you can do your process mining, and you can overlay the risk and controls on top, because you're taking a download of all the recent risk and controls that are there, mapped and linked against the whatever level you want to go to. Or if you want to look at a process view of risk in the the risk system, then you overlay the process map on top of it, and then you ask the reporting, saying, okay, of all the different processes we have which are aligned to this level 2 or level 3, what controls are in place? Where can I align multiple processes? In banking, you could look at personal lending, credit cards, asset finance, which basically at a level 3 is exactly the same process. And you can overlay saying, right, tell me where the controls are. And suddenly you'll find that one process has got the controls up front, other processes have got the controls down the end. So, well, why is that the case? That doesn't make sense. Basically the same process. Why don't we line them up in the same place? One is really effective with little incident. The other one is ineffective with loads of issues. You go, right, so the design must be poor. So how do we get best practice with that design control design? Because it basically should be the same thing. So it allows you to suddenly see insights that have never been there before, allows you to clearly identify where you need to go after to improve. So it can be done. It has been done. And whoever's got that question and they're not too sure how to do it, I'm very happy to speak to them offline and show them examples about how it's embedded. And if people can tell you it can't be done, it's impossible, it's too hard, then they're just wrong.
Do you find, Dan, I think in my more limited experience, professional risk people respond very well to the whole process idea, because they They understand that there's a flow of activities, and that's how we get work done. And whatever they might call it, we'd call it a process. So that's where the risk event will be realised. Therefore, that's where it's got to be, managed and mitigated and avoided, and all of those good things. So the logic of that seems to appeal to risk managers. I think, in my experience, it
is. You're quite right. Yeah.
And so obviously, every organisation is at a different maturity level in terms of how they're tackling business process management and risk management and all of these different elements. I know, Roger, you've got you've been working with organisations from around the world. Because we're all sitting in Australia at the moment. Where do we? It's a question that was sent in. Is where does Australia sit in terms of from a global point of view in terms of how where we've adopted or implemented business process management?
Yeah, I would leap in immediately and say I don't pretend to have a picture of the world, but I think anywhere, maybe there's one exception, but in my experience, but anywhere, it's a very patchy thing. It really depends on the people. You could make a list of all the places Dan has worked, and you could say that they're doing it well, or at least they were when he was there. Sometimes these things change. But it's hard to know, isn't it? Because, and if there's this kind of dream that we have this database of BPM maturity, and we could measure it to the second decimal point, and we'd be able to rank thousands of organisations. But the biggest problem, of course, is that organisations that take it seriously may not want to tell you all of that good information because they see it as part of their key competitive advantage. So, if I'm in a bank, I'm not going to publish to the world the very best way anyone's ever worked out to run a bank. It's probably not going to happen. There's just limitations like that. So I think it's not good. But I mean, I think there are lots and lots of organisations doing it very well. And my sense is, I have no stats for this, but my sense is that the number of organisations doing it well or headed towards doing it better, at least, is increasing. Now, that I mentioned an exception, and you were talking. You published an interview with Hassan Ali-Maidan the other day from Saudi Arabia, and I've done a lot of work there, so perhaps I'm there's some bias here, but it's almost mandatory for organisations there to have a process architecture or taxonomy or whatever, and then to do something useful about managing and improving processes. As Hassan was saying the other day, there is in fact there's a kind of royal decree. Talk about executive buy-in. In a kingdom where the king is king, then that kind of helps. But there's a lot happens there. And, I would agree too that there was a lot needed to happen. I've been travelling through Riyadh Airport, for example, for 15 years, and I used to dread the thought of arriving. But, I was there recently, and from the time the plane landed, this was maybe 7 a.m., time the plane landed to me being outside the terminal, getting into some transport, was 20 minutes. Now, that's hard to do in most airports. And it's massive change of process, of people, of systems, huge investments, of course, but driven by, strategic necessities of increasing tourism, making it an easier place to do business. And so it's, there is a strategic and compelling reasons at the national level that you, whenever you find that at any organisation at the top level, then things happen. So, yeah.
It also helps if you're a VIP, Roger, in there.
No, I get in the queue, but, I say I get in the queue, but there very seldom are queues, Someone's actually thought about it really well. And there are people there doing triage and concierge and, folks wandering around, scratching their head, not knowing which queue they should be in. Someone comes to you very quickly and puts you in the queue. And,
but I think that's the key point, right? Where so maybe it goes back to the first question we had about the word process and so on. And what I do find in Australia, we're very focused across the industries about customer experience. What's the customer experience look like? How do we improve the customer experience? The only way you can improve the customer experience is to understand the process and have a target state and move towards it. So, if people don't want to talk about process, then you talk about the most important thing, which every executive, every person in the organization will down a ditch for, and that's about the customer experience. And so just talk about the customer experience. How do we improve the customer experience? How do we improve the staff experience? They're the two key measures we always look at. So that there's your answer to the first question, and also to the point about, where are we as in Australia? And I think we're very service orientated. We're very customer service orientated. So I think we're going to get better and better, particularly across the industry I'm in as well, right? We got a stark wake up call some time ago to be much more customer experience, and I think that's you'll see a lot more of that coming out in the next few weeks, months, and years.
Yep. And there were two benefits out of COVID, but streamlining a lot of customer interaction experience is one of them. It's pretty hard these days, I find, to go somewhere, and if you say you want to give them cash, they look at you strangely. They think, oh, yeah, okay, we've got someone here who understands that old technology. Let me find them for you,
And Dan, I was going to say that you're obviously you've been very much in the financial services space for quite a number of years. Would you say the financial services area are the ones that are leading or pioneering in this space of BPM, or are you noticing it across the board?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you. I'm not deep enough in the other industries, but when I do speak to other people who are involved in BPM and who are in other industries, they're very similar. I think that the benefit of financial services is that they'll typically invest in this a lot more, and they'll look at the newer technologies, and they'll do it from an enterprise-wide environment. And the regulators here, I think, are very, very strong. So they force us to think in an end-to-end way. They want to understand what the high-impact processes are. They want to understand how they work end-to-end. So they sort of force you to think and document it that way. So I think from that element, we're probably consistently more mature. But it'll also come down to, if you look at supermarkets and so on, if you're anywhere who's got really great customer experiences, at the end of the day, they will have a really good understanding about what the flow is, what the workflow is like, what the value chain is like. You can use whatever term you want to use. That's the base understanding of that, about how to improve, how to be more efficient, how to give the right experience, the most consistent experience is going to be really good at this type of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So
I think there's lots of good stuff happening in government too, I mean, government process management is it's qualitatively different in many respects to business process management, if we can make that distinction, because the value you're delivering is, it doesn't come down to the kind of percentages and profit numbers and whatever. Maybe it's cost savings, but the value of a government agency, particularly a policy department, what is the value of better policy? What's the the whole, government departments themselves, the whole, like, it feels to me anyway, 90% of all the work they do is about taking a ton of information and refining it down to the point where it's something that somebody senior is going to sign or say. And the whole mechanism is about improving the quality of what ends up on the paper for the speech or on the thing to be signed. And that's a massive undertaking, and it's hard to put what is the cost benefit? You can measure the cost, but what is the benefit of better decision making in government, Everyone will say, yeah, we should have better decision making in government. Why don't those people get it right? Yeah, okay, but that's not a measure, is it? That's not a KPI.
Mm.
So there's lots of good work going on in government. I think there are some I'm sure there are some department, state, federal level, local government as well, I'm sure, that do extremely good work. Don't hear about it enough, probably.
And I heard an interesting example not too long ago about, I think it was a supermarket in Germany that they were looking at their sort of the customer experience. And I think they had recognised that, if we truly know our customers, we would know that some of our customers actually are very lonely, very isolated people. They actually go to the supermarket for that social interaction. And so they ended up making these dedicated queues, which were like the slow queues or the slow lanes. So you can come do your shopping here, and our checkout people will have all the time in the day to sort of talk to you and be that sort of social connection for them. So I think that was a very sort of interesting perspective where it's not always tied to, I guess, a dollar value at the end of the day, directly at least. Yeah,
I read that, the slow queue. It would feel a bit stigmatizing, I would have thought. Big sign, if you want to chat all day, come to this queue. Free chats with your checkout, I guess. But yeah, I mean, that's a sad problem, isn't it? That we probably shouldn't be fixing by having longer chat times in a checkout. That's a bigger problem. That's a lost luggage problem, isn't it? We shouldn't get better at finding lost luggage. We should get better at not losing it.
Right. One question that came up many times, and I want to quickly touch on this, is the topic of artificial intelligence, because it's been a huge topic over the last few months. I think ChatGPT really kind of brought it mainstream and brought it into the minds of a lot of everyday people. And I just had a flood of these questions come in, and I'll just whiz through a couple of them, but I'm keen to, Dan, we might get you to kick us off, but keen to get your thoughts on it. We've seen impressive advances and also lots of noise in various fronts of AI technologies. Predictive, prescriptive, and conversational capabilities are coming of age. Do you think this will have any impact on BPM practices at a strategic or tactical level? What's the impact of generative AI on BPM? How should I prepare for the inevitable disruption AI will have on BPM? For example, as a BPM supplier, practitioner, and or as a client consumer of BPM products or services. What does the role of tools like ChatGPT and or conversation AI in the world of business process management? So lots of conversations around this topic. Has this been a topic on your radar, Dan? Can you share a little bit?
Yeah, it's certainly a topic on our radar. So in addition to running operations where I am currently, I also have the automation and process improvement for the group as well, certainly here in Australia. So AI is a critical component. How do you take advantage of and augment the technologies that are out there? So you always want to look at the new technologies. And certainly ChatGPT is a bit like when the iPhone came out, it was a step change about what mobile phone was. It just moved it to a whole new level where even now we're taking advantage about what it can provide. And I think the same thing with ChatGPT. It's a step change in what we all thought as a consumer AI. And we're going to start now thinking about what does it mean from an enterprise or a business AI? Where do you take advantage of it? And there are some bots out there that using native language and using insights and AI to improve the type of biometrics that we have to help you make better decisions and much faster decisions. I think like any technology, you've got to embrace it. You've got to take advantage of what the tools and technology can provide to help you with the experience that you're trying to drive out. In certain processes that we'll have, it goes back to the point, why would anyone want to be looking at manually touching or making a judgment call if it's so simple that AI can do it, allows you and your business to then focus on the more complex stuff or when things go wrong, which typically what happens in an organization, but we never spend enough time on it. Or it gives you more time in the organization to think about the future rather than just thinking about how to do your day-to-day job. So if you're not embracing AI, understanding what AI can do, testing AI out, then you're definitely going to be stepped over. I always put it back to also, when I speak to developers with the applications that we use, I often ask, how often are you with the users? How often do you observe how your technology is used by the people you developed it for? Typically, it's rare, right? They never sit down and actually say, show me what you do with this thing I've developed for you. Right? How do you use the screen? Do you use it in the way that I've designed it? And so it'll be the same with these type of technologies that we have. There's a test and learn type of environment that we should do. It is a hybrid and augmented service that you can plug in, take advantage of to get to decisions or answers or judgment calls much faster. I think the most important thing is about the old Russian saying, you got to trust but verify. So how do you know the thing works? ChatGPT is being very open and honest and saying, you can ask some questions in it and do some research in it, but it only goes back so far in certain parts of social media. It's not always right. So don't think that everything get out of ChatGPT. And trust me, I know this because I was using it last week to help my son do some research. And when it was referencing some books to look for certain comments, I happened to have one of those books here, and I looked in the book and there was no such thing. And I'm going, right, you're wrong. So whatever it picked up the information from was wrong. So verify everything that you get from it as well. So I guess long story short, when you're doing BPM, and some of the tools are out there, and the tools will get more advanced. Some of the BPM tools are there. Doing the scenario testing, looking at, particularly when you use process mining, and then you can twig the type of scenarios that you have, change the process, and then using AI to then do that future scenario test and say, if we were to make these changes, if we were to make this move, if we were to change the type of volumes that came through because of the change that we did up front, what would that look like? I think that's where AI is really going to come into its fruition. That's where we're going to make some big advances and changes from, and we should utilize that. So, yeah, big supporter of the new technology, big supporter of ChatGPT, but verify everything. Don't trust everything that comes out of it. And then the tools are out there, particularly things around process mining. I think that's where we're going to see the really big benefit from a BPM experts who use it. And if you're then automating a process, the more you can use the bots with AI insight, particularly on biometric stuff, to help you remove the need for a human eye to look, touch, or judge, so that they get more time to do the real judgment on the more complex of exceptions, then that's a benefit for all of us as well. So that's the way we're looking and thinking about it.
That's great. And Roger, do you have any sort of words of warning or caution to maybe those that dive into these new technologies, maybe without sort of understanding the full picture or context of their organisation and, what's going to work for us? And should we be heading in that direction, or do we need to get the fundamentals right first?
Yeah, so, technology is technology, isn't it? And we use it all the time, and there's always going to be bright, shiny technologies and radical, life-changing technology developments. This won't be the last. We take the phone, we take this kind of recording and interaction for granted now, but even 5 years ago it was pretty dodgy. 10 years ago it was extreme. So these things will come and go, will come and they'll make a change. There'll be lots of it. It's still always about organizational performance, though, isn't it? And the tool is the tool. Technology is important, but it is just one of the ways in which we improve process performance, just to say improve organizational performance. So I think if you'll undoubtedly use AI to make some decisions that humans don't need to make, because it's pretty obvious even when the humans make it. So you can do that, but to be able to make that work, you've got to know what decisions we make. So it's not like you can just order a new AI world online and it turns up and you install it. It's a very complicated world we're talking about, which needs to have lots of guardrails and those kind of trust but verify things that Dan's just talking about, because ChatGPT has a habit from time to time of making stuff up, it seems, and it's going to get harder and harder to know what's true and what's not, particularly when the references you have for something that that an AI is telling you is an AI-generated reference. I mean, it could be in 3 years' time, all the references people are generating are flawed anyway. So, the whole thing is in serious trouble. So then we might really want to know what our processes are. We really do need to know that, what's the problem we're trying to fix? That's the question all the time, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And Dan, you mentioned just before, you touched on process mining. I know that there are a lot of people that still haven't sort of ventured down that path yet, but it's a lot of people are well aware of it. I think Gartner even brought out their first sort of magic quadrant for process mining tools today or this week or at some point. So it is certainly on a lot of people's radar, but I think the question still being asked is, are we mature enough? Is it right for us? Should we adopt this technology, or are there things that we need to be aware of before jumping into this? Can you give us a little bit of insight from your experience?
Yeah, sure. So I've used it now for a number of years. I've used different tools. For process mining to work, data is the most important thing, right? So whether you're going to get from the logs, you need to have really good SMEs who then deep dive in with the technology and data experts to link and understand to make sure that they're capturing the right information at the right time with the right timestamps and so on. So it is a lot of hard work to get it in and get it embedded and get everyone on board to accept that's the single source of truth, because it needs to be. And what you typically find, and what I found is, every division has their own reporting, they have their own terminology, they have their own interpretation of data. So that's a lot of work to try and align them. And a lot of people give up at that point because it's too hard. I haven't got the information, I haven't got the data. That's telling me something different that we used to report before. So now I've got to explain the past. I don't really want to do that if the future looks or the reality looks very different. So you do need you need to be quite assertive, and you need to be disciplined and to ensure that you drive through all that noise. But once you have it in place, and I said, to me, this is where you take a risk as a BPM. I remember when I first started playing with it, no one's ever asked for it. I saw what I could do in a demonstration. I went, that's exactly what I'm looking for, because if I can show the visualization of actually what happens for a customer to an executive audience, and then each month show that either the variance is reducing because of the changes we're making, or it's getting worse, which means the behavior and culture here as an organization is poor, that's the thing that's going to get them excited. And that's the thing that's going to gain their attention, because you can show a process map and it's just linear, it just goes flat and everyone goes, yeah, whatever. You show a mining map, and in some circumstances we've seen for some of our high impact products, there's like 2,500 ways you could do a certain type of go through the flow, right? So, and you can see what the loops are. So it brings it to life. It cuts through, pages and pages of paper that typically you'd have to present to someone. It cuts through the dialogue and PowerPoints you typically have to try and pull together to explain why you should do it. You can just show one page, which is what I typically do, saying, here's your problem. Here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to do the variance on. And then you can just then replay it, right? So we now look at it from a month by month. Is the variance is reducing? Is the number of reworks we're having reducing? And the loops we're doing reducing? Is it an education thing? Is it a behavioral thing? Is it a system control thing? Is it the policy thing? Which is the levers that we can pull? And if it shows month on month, quarter by quarter, that it's not making improvements, then we know we're doing the wrong stuff. So, because when you look at your reporting and you look at SLAs or turnaround times, there's a lot of stuff hidden in there. SLAs might be down or backlogs might be down, but that's because we spent loads of time doing overtime, or you might have hired loads more people, or you've done something else, right? So this takes all that noise away. So huge supporter of it, big believer in it. It does take some discipline, it does take some tenacity to make sure that you're following it through. But once you've done that and you've got your core base and everyone agrees that that's a single source of truth, then I think it's a leap forward about what the key thinking and key decision that you can take. And that's what always comes down to.
That's fantastic. That's great. And the last question I wanted to ask you both, and that has been also submitted from our community, is What is the top characteristic about BPM that keeps you passionate about this whole space? Roger, we'll start with yourself.
So I have this experience on pretty much every project I do. We start out with a group of people, and one of the things we're doing is building the process architecture, the taxonomy and the way I do it, we start with the strategy and work our way down a few levels. And we go through that exercise and we start out, we've got people in the room who think, yeah, here we go again, more of this process stuff. And almost every time, somewhere through that couple of weeks of work, people start saying, I didn't understand this organisation as well as I do now. And I've got a whole bunch of other questions about other stuff I don't understand that this conversation has provoked. So, and indeed, I thought I understood our strategy because it reads well, highly crafted. It's got the commas in the right place, and it's a nice poster on the wall there. But when it comes down to actually executing it, rubber on the road stuff, I had no idea how that actually happens, but now I do. So I like those moments where, eyes light up. Now, for some people, of course, eyes glaze over and they're never going to light up. But there's usually enough people in a room that think, gee, yeah, okay, that all makes sense. Why haven't we been doing this for a long time?
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of a book actually that Dan recommended, I think from memory, Fast Break, the CEO's Guide from Strategy to Execution. I can't quite think of the author off the top of my head, but
John Childress. Yeah.
John Childress, yeah. And diving into this topic of, as an organisation, how are we actually executing these strategic objectives? What does that look like when you actually filter it down into all of the hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of people that are all helping to deliver value through this organisation? But Dan, from yourself, what is the top characteristic for you of BPM that keeps you passionate about it?
Oh, the passion is when you're out and about doing the Gemba walks or going to different huddles or out in the team and people are talking about the end-to-end experience or understand the part they play in the end-to-end experience, and they're very clear what part they play and how that impacts the upstream and downstream. So I love going out and people talking about it and seeing it. And then, when you're successful, when you're not the one talking about end-to-end processes, it's actually the CEO or the CIO or it's the CRO or it's the different group execs who are responsible for different parts. They talk about end-to-end processes as part of their normal language. And you're going, great. It's like, when the chief marketing officer says, when they're not talking about it, but the CEO is talking about the marketing budget and what they're doing with marketing and how they're engaging customers, then it's embedded. That's the way that the company's thinking. And once the company thinks that way end-to-end about conscious thinking and conscious decisioning, then you always see continuous improvement. And, in its results, in its revenue, whether it's in its costs, whether it's risk and controls, and its engagement with its people, you just see that improving month on month, year on year. So that's what keeps me engaged. And that's why I love working with organizations who accept the fact that they may not be at the right place, but they want to be. And therefore, they say, please come with that passion and engagement because we want to get to the next level. And once you have that at the right CEO point, even though they're trying to get their head around it, but they know it's the right thing to do, then it's very easy to get passionate and get up in the morning with a smile on your face and saying, yeah, we're going to make a difference here. But let me be clear, it's bloody hard, right? So when anyone says it's easy and it's not a technology solution, it's a really, I use the word over and over again, tenacity. You got to have tenacity, you got to have patience, and you got to use all the influencing styles that you have to get this to life. But once it is, and once it's embedded and other people are doing it, then it's beautiful.
That's fantastic. Well, for everyone that is listening to this, if you've gleaned as much from this conversation as I have, then please share it with someone that you know that needs to hear what we've been discussing today. Also, rating reviews certainly going to help us out a lot to continue to spread this message. Honestly, we've only touched the surface of all the questions that were submitted. We probably got through less than 10% of the questions, if I'm honest. But as I said at the beginning, Dan and Roger we're more than happy to connect on LinkedIn and respond to any sort of follow-up questions that you might have after this podcast. But Dan, Roger, it's been, again, an absolute privilege to have you both on the episode. I'm so glad we were able to bring you together on this one episode. You bounce off each other very, very well. And we've certainly gained a lot of insight and wisdom from you both. So from the whole community, thank you so much.
Thanks, Daniel. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for everything you're doing with the community as well, Daniel. Your interviews are brilliant. I love listening to them and sitting down and going through it. My son just came in from school and heard your voice, and he was desperate to come over and say hello, but he's run downstairs to do some study.
No, that's fantastic. Well, I appreciate the support. And for everyone that's listening, we'll see you on the next episode.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.